So I'm Tiffany Henry, and I'm the director of the Small Business Center at Southwestern Community College. And we are a resource and partner for people that are looking at starting a small business or have a small business. And we do that through programs and seminars just like this, as well as confidential one-on-one counseling. And we also are doing this. This is the Empowering Mountain Food Systems program. Laura Lawfer has joined us today, and she's going to tell you a little bit more at the end of this program about that. But we are doing this in partnership with all of our small business centers in the far western part of North Carolina. So that would be Haywood Community College, of course, Southwestern, and Tri-County Community College in the far west. So this is a partnership. If you know anything about the Small Business Center Network, one thing that you hopefully have learned is we're all about partnerships and collaboration and working with one another. So it's really important for us. And by doing so, we've also really strengthened our partnership with Blue Ridge Food Ventures. And Michael McDonald is joining us today. We've, for those of you that have attended some of these webinars that we've had, I think we've had 2 so far. I think this is the 3rd one. Smithson Mills is one of the partners there at Blue Ridge Food Ventures, and Michael and him work very closely together. And so they're kind of tag teaming this a little bit. So Michael is going to be presenting today for us. And we are really excited to have you join us. And I'm going to go ahead and stop talking and let you have at it, Michael. But yeah, so for all of you joining us, make sure you are asking questions in the chat. We will try and answer it when it's appropriate, and just use the chat for that, not the Q&A. Okay. All right, Michael.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and presenting this for food manufacturing for small scale businesses. My name is Michael McDonald. I am the Client Services Manager at Blue Ridge Food Ventures, which is a 12,000 square foot shared use commercial food processing center here in Candler, North Carolina. What we're going to talk about today are some elements of manufacturing a food product in what would probably be for most of you a new environment of a shared use commercial kitchen. We're going to cover some things about how food gets made and sold commercially. The most important thing here in that top banner is the safe and wholesome manner in which things are made. I'll try not to belabor the point. I get fairly accused of belaboring the point of hand washing, but I digress. So the key topics that we'll look at today in this presentation are safety and efficiency in food manufacturing. We'll go over some of the basic types of processing, the authorities that you're processing under, the packaging that you put your products in, the regulatory agencies and the compliance that you'll have to follow for those regulatory agencies, labeling of your food products, supply chain documentation and recall plans, the important equipment for food processing, and usually in person I would hand out a key manufacturing resources worksheet. I'm sure that at the end of this, that's something that I can, Tiffany or Laura, I can send to you and you can forward on to our participants here. But that's just a list of things that you might be able to access mostly online to learn more about the topics that we're going to go over. I will apologize. Some of these topics that we'll look at today, we can really take a deep dive into. There's a lot more information than I'm going to be able to give you in this format. So forgive me if we kind of glance over some things, but there are a lot of things to kind of go over. So without further ado, let's talk initially about safety in food manufacturing. A couple of different avenues that we'll follow in terms of safety in food manufacturing. One is personal safety, something we've all been hearing a great deal about in the last few months, personal protective equipment, equipment safety, and food safety in terms of food safety training courses that would be relevant for the types of productions you may find yourself doing. Again, sanitation and hygiene are going to be a paramount concern for producing the food for human consumption. Those allergens that may or may not be present in your food or even just in the production environment that you are in, that's an increasingly important concern with respect to food manufacturing. And then, of course, foodborne illness, something you'll hear me say a few times probably today, is that sick people and dead people are really bad for business. So we want to do the best that we can in terms of sanitation, hygiene, protection, training, and whatnot to prevent any of those things from happening. In terms of your personal safety, the personal protective equipment that you want to be comfortable with and familiar with in a kitchen production environment, aprons, hair nets and beard nets, gloves, face masks, closed-toed shoes, and clean-fitting clothing. A lot of these things we provide at Blue Ridge Food Ventures. We call them consumables. And without these things, there is an increased possibility that you can spread germs or foodborne pathogens, so we'll do our best to avoid that. I will make a quick note about gloves. As a person who's been in kitchens a lot, gloves, I think, are great for specific purposes, particularly in keeping sticky or hot things off of your hands. But I will say that when I am observing kitchen productions, gloves tend to make me a little bit nervous because it gives us a false sense of security that the problem is not actually with the skin of our hands, it's what we touch. And that false sense of security with gloves, sometimes I see people doing things when they're wearing gloves with that false sense of security that would not otherwise do with their bare hands. Personal safety in terms of equipment safety, you are probably going to be using equipment that is not only somewhat unfamiliar to you, but also much bigger, faster, and potentially more dangerous. So the equipment that we use in kitchen productions is normally what we call NSF certified, and that is a safety certification. Commercial restaurant equipment and commercial food production equipment for retail and wholesale should carry an NSF certification. When you get onto some of this new equipment, read, learn, and follow those equipment manuals. Because again, these things are bigger, faster, and potentially more dangerous. In that avenue of danger, we require people to not wear loose clothing that's flowing. We don't want anybody wearing long jewelry or keeping your hair tied back. You can sometimes get caught up in this equipment. The quote there at the bottom by Upton Sinclair is a novel called The Jungle, which was about the meat packing industry in the early 20th century. And there were a lot of stories back then about people getting caught up in the equipment and pulled into the end product, as it were. And his quote there, "I aimed at the public's heart, and by accident I hit it in the stomach." Trying to bring up the problems in that industry, but the things that equipment can do to you also made people a little bit nauseated, which makes sense when you think about it. Food safety training courses. There are a lot of different things that you can attend depending on the type of product that you're going to be making and the regulatory environment that those products fall under. Probably one of the most common is ServSafe certification. This is primarily for the management of restaurants. However, the information that's contained in that course is completely relevant to all sorts of different aspects of commercial food production, from sanitation and foodborne pathogens to methodology for storing ingredients properly in a walk-in cooler. There's also an FDA Fundamentals of Food Safety course, similar in respect to ServSafe and a lot of the other types of food safety training that you might find. But particularly if you've not been in kitchens for a long time, if you're new to food production, particularly commercial food production of retail and wholesale products, I can't stress enough how important it is to get some of the insider information about what we do unconsciously that may contaminate food and ways to avoid all manner of different problems that you might encounter during food production. HACCP is another thing that you might have heard about, hazard analysis of critical control points. This is basically an analysis of those points in a production where hazards may occur. There's 3 types of hazards: biological, chemical, and physical. And We identify those points where those problems may occur and write a plan that helps us to mitigate the problems that might happen. That HACCP is just in process. So when you see preventive controls for qualified individuals or PCQI, this is kind of like HACCP on steroids. HACCP just covers the production process. PCQI covers everything from the sourcing of your inputs, be they your bottles, jars, caps, labels, tamper seals, to the quality of the truck that they showed up on, the intake process from receiving inputs or food products to the facility, how those get stored before production, and what happens to them after production as well. So it takes those elements of HACCP and kind of expands it to every aspect of food production in a commercial environment. Then something that is very frequently required of the folks that utilize Blue Ridge Food Ventures, what's called Better Process Control School. You might have heard people talk about this as if they call it pickle school. When I first heard of pickling school, I said, well, that's something I want to do. I want to go to pickle school. But what that does, it's thermal processing for acidified foods. So anybody that's making anything like a hot sauce or a barbecue sauce, anything that's heated and has an acidified ingredients such as vinegar or lemon juice or something like that, something acidic. That teaches us how to safely get an acidified food product into a jar or bottle and control the main pathogen that we are worried about in an anaerobic environment like a sealed bottle, which is botulism. Historically, again, HACCP focuses on the process itself, and PCQI includes more than HACCP. I'm going to go over these just briefly since kind of reiterating what we've already discussed. Food safety plan. It is a good idea to have a plan that covers the methodology that you and your employees are going to follow when you make your particular products. Now, don't want to go, again, too deeply into food safety plans. You can Google food safety plan and you'll find some that have 5 elements and some that have 7 elements and some have 15 elements of food safety plan. But review food safety plans, figure out what elements of unsafe food production practices may find their way into that process, and then make plans for mitigating that. So food safety with respect to sanitation and hygiene. Rule number 1, you've already heard me say that the things that you do in the kitchen are very important in terms of sanitation and hygiene. Wash your hands. I can't stress enough how important washing your hands is going to be. I know you've probably heard this over and over and over again. Hot soapy water, 20 seconds. Now, the reason we use hot water instead of cold water is because hot water just helps soap do its job better. You may think or may have heard someone say that we use hot water to wash our hands because it kills the bacteria and other things on our hands that might make people sick, and that's just not true, because the temperature that you would need to put your hands under that water would probably take your skin off too to make those other things die. So wash your hands, hot soapy water, 20 seconds. Second rule, wash your hands. And get under your fingernails too. Some places have those little scrubbing brushes that can get up under your nails. The friction here is very important. So what some people do is kind of scratch their palms like so to get some of that soap up under the fingernails. Rule number 3, food safety, sanitation, and hygiene, wash your hands. Wash your hands, wash your fingernails, and wash your forearms. You want to be scrubbing up like you pretending you're a doctor in a TV soap. Wash your hands, wash your fingernails, wash your forearms, 20 seconds, hot water. That is going to mitigate probably 90% of any sort of sanitation problems that you're going to have just by washing your hands. And why do I harp on this so much? When we look at the size of bacteria and viruses measured in the micrometer and nanometer range, they're super tiny. There are cracks and crevices all over your hands that are like the Grand Canyon to these things. Micrometer measurements there about a fifth of the size of a human hair or a millionth of a meter. There's nanometer sized viruses and whatnot, or 1,000 times smaller than that. So they can be tricky to get off of your hand. This is a diagram or a meme here that you have probably seen before, maybe in biology class. This is the exponential expansion or growth of bacteria. And I bring this up just to show you that if we miss just a little bit of bacteria or whatnot on our hands or on our equipment, it can double in size every 20 minutes, right? And what that can end up with is 5,000 billion bacteria just over the course of a single day. So again, please make sure that you are conscientiously washing not only your hands, but the equipment that you end up using as well. We provide sanitizer for this purpose, also wash, rinse, and sanitize. And I encourage you, if you have alcohol-based hand sanitizer next to your wash sinks, wash your hands and then use the sanitizer, and please don't let sanitizer stand in for washing your hands. And once you've washed your hands, we talked about gloves and why that makes me a little bit nervous from false sense of security that people may have. But another thing that people do not think about sometimes in the kitchen is that what are you doing with your hands while you're in there in process making the product? Are you touching a spray bottle that was not sanitized? Did you touch the bottom of the table to move it that was not sanitized? Did you pick something up off the ground? Did you touch your face, your hair, your cell phone, and so forth? Unconsciously, we touch our hair and our faces all the time. We probably had problems with this with our personal protective equipment in the last few months. I never realized how much I like to touch my face until this whole coronavirus thing came about. But particularly in the kitchen, scratching your hair, scratching your eyebrows, scratching your neck even. Be careful. Every time you do something like that, you have to rewash and sanitize your hands. Coughing, sneezing, same thing. We encourage people in the kitchen to cough or sneeze into their elbow, at least to mitigate the spread of those droplets. Now, of course, we're requiring everybody to wear masks, so that's another method that helps people to prevent the spread of airborne illnesses. And then also, what are you doing with your cell phone? If we were in a classroom setting right now, I would ask everybody, how many people bring their cell phone with them into the bathroom? And without fail, maybe half of the people in the room say that they do, and that's when I accuse the other people of lying about that, because we all know most people are bringing their cell phones into the bathroom, and that's fine, but please be aware that when you do that, the cell phone is something that needs to be either in your pocket. Some people put them in plastic bags. Sanitize the plastic bag and use those when they're in the kitchen. It can be helpful to have a recipe in front of you. Sometimes people like to have music on while they're in production. But anything you can do to prevent yourself from touching things that are otherwise unsanitary and introducing that potential hygiene problem into the food process, the better we can avoid that. Allergens are increasingly important in terms of not only the food products that you make and the labels that you put on them, but also how those are taken into the facility, how and where those are stored in the facility, and how we prevent cross-contact and cross-contamination of both people and equipment and final products from those allergens. The big 8 allergens are tree nuts, ground nuts, shellfish, fish, wheat, soy, eggs, and dairy. Now, these aren't the only allergens, of course, but these are the ones that traditionally cause the greatest amount of problems and are also also going to be important, not just in intake storage, contact, and contamination issues, but also in labeling. It's going to be very important that any sort of allergens be declared on your label. When we get to the labeling, we'll show you that there's a couple of different ways that you can go about addressing that concern. We'll move on to some of the foodborne illness concerns here. The fact about foodborne illnesses is that most of the time, foodborne illness occurs in the home. A lot of your restaurant and retail, wholesale, food production employees have been trained in methodology for avoiding foodborne illnesses. Not the case with people in the home. Most of these illnesses are fairly mild, but can be severe at times. And every year, almost 9 million Americans will be sickened by some sort of foodborne illness. 53,000 of those Americans will probably end up in the hospital, and over 2,300 of those are going to die from these foodborne illnesses, particularly people with compromised immune systems or other maladies, if you will, that make them more prone to getting sick. Babies, the elderly, people who have immune problems can be more severely impacted by these foodborne illnesses than anybody else. Sometimes we write this off as a 24-hour stomach bug, and often that's the case, but not the case for everybody. And they're expensive. Overall, costs us annually about $15.6 billion to our economy for foodborne illnesses. Well, what do we do to prevent those problems? The cost of good practice and environmental monitoring in a food production environment is going to be much less than the cost of a foodborne illness outbreak. If you want to do these sorts of testings in-house, you can get an incubator and testing supplies, and that's going to cost you, up to $1,000 a year, which is not insignificant. But when we look at the cost of foodborne illness outbreaks over the course of a year, and to the viability of your business to survive a potential foodborne illness outbreak, $1,000 a year is much better than having to fold your business. Another thing that goes along with that, at the bottom of the screen there, product liability insurance. You want to make sure that you have product liability insurance for the products that you are making. And if you are in a shared use environment like Blue Ridge Food Ventures, we would also ask that you include Blue Ridge Food Ventures as the additional insured on that declarations page, so that everybody involved in the food production process is covered. It's not very expensive. You can get a $2 million product liability insurance policy, and that's the industry standard, $2 million, for about $300 to $400 a year. Check with your existing insurance providers to see if you can benefit from bundling that policy with others and get a cost sharing discount that way. If not, I encourage you to look at what's called the Food Liability Insurance Program, or FLIP. You can go to FLIprogram.com. They focus on a narrow set of insurance activities, particularly focused on food liability, and usually you can get somewhere between $300 or $400 a year for that policy. It's a really, really good idea. Now, what do these things end up costing us? The largest outbreaks are caused by salmonella. That's going to cost the economy over $3.6 billion every year. The deadliest that you may have heard of is listeria, and that's to the tune of over $2.8 billion a year. Or the most common, we go back to those stomach bugs, those 24-hour bugs, 48-hour bugs. Norovirus is the most common cause of those sorts of illnesses. Norovirus at above $2.2 billion. There's also some others. Campylobacter is a fairly common one, almost $2 billion. And then infamous E. coli at several $100 million. So you consider the costs of mitigating this on the front end versus having to pay for this on the back end. And can your business survive this? For those of you who are starting food businesses, that's probably the most important concern about a foodborne illness outbreak. Most businesses, I think, can't overcome the bad publicity and other hurdles that come along with being involved in a food illness outbreak. Here at Blue Ridge Food Ventures, this was many years before my time here. I've been here for 5 years, but Smiling Hera is a tempeh company. I think it was back in 2012, experienced a foodborne illness outbreak. For those of you who are unfamiliar with tempeh, this is a fermented product. You take a lactobacillus starter and you ferment those beans. What happened here was that they received tainted starter from their source somewhere in Southeast Asia. I'm not exactly sure, but that starter came in tainted and ended up in the final product. It made, I think, somewhere between 80 and 100 people in Western North Carolina sick. I don't believe anybody died from that illness outbreak, but the publicity there obviously was very bad. However, due to their openness with the regulatory authorities and the robustness of their recall plan, they did actually survive this outbreak. I don't know if some of you might know Mary Lou Sergi. She was the executive director at Blue Ridge Food Ventures at the time. And if you talk to the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and the FDA, they will say that that was the textbook right way to handle that sort of problem. Due in no small part to their support in the local communities as well, the outreach that they've done. Let's talk a little bit about efficiency in food manufacturing. Your unit costs, your cost of goods sold are going to be very important to the success of marketing and advertising a new food product. And whatever we can do to improve the efficiency in process in the kitchen is going to lower those overall costs for you. When you are making a food product at home, you want to obviously know your formulation and your process. But you're probably going to be making a fairly small batch. When you come into an environment like Blue Ridge Food Ventures, your formulation and your process may have to change a little bit. I encourage all of you who have a base recipe to think through that recipe and look at the way that you're measuring your ingredients. If you are solely relying on volumetric measurements, I would recommend that you revisit those recipes and try and make sure that you can measure those out by weight rather than volume. Weight will always be a 1-to-1 scale up. When you go from a batch of 10 to a batch of 1,000, for instance, if you're off by just a small percent on your original formulation due to volume, then it's going to be way, way off in the final product when you multiply that by 100. And think about it in terms of when you make chocolate chip cookies, you can put that brown sugar into that cup measure. And if you just loosely pack it in there, it's going to weigh maybe 5 ounces. But if you cram that sugar down in, you press it really hard into that cup measure, it could be 8-9 ounces by the time you're through. So, may not be a big deal in a small batch of cookies, but if you're doing 1,000, then it becomes a problem. Think through your process, learn your new equipment, and we'll go back to utilizing those manuals. There are lots of videos on YouTube where people will show you how these pieces of production equipment operate, either on YouTube, on the website of the seller. They usually have equipment information like that. If you come to Blue Ridge Food Ventures, that's something that we're going to do is train you on the use of this new production equipment that can take you to the next level of production. Same with packaging equipment. You might be using a heat gun to put a tamper seal on something. Well, we've got a conveyor line with a tamper tunnel. That's doing the same thing ultimately, but you're using a different piece of equipment to do that. So think through what you're making, how you're measuring it, and even how many people you require for this process. Again, making a hot sauce at home, you might be able to do that all by yourself with a funnel, but when you get into some of this larger equipment that requires not only one person sitting at it to operate it, and then another person to keep the hopper full and the jars staged, oftentimes you're going to need at least another person, if not 2 or 3 other people. And you're going to have to pay those people as employees as well. So keep that in mind when you are revisiting this new process in a new environment. The 3 basic types of packaging that we use at Blue Ridge Food Ventures and are pretty much standard in the industry are glass, plastic, and flexible packaging, which is gaining in popularity. You see it a lot more in Canada and in Europe. I hope it's going to catch on here. It has some advantages, has some disadvantages. We're going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of these different types of packaging, starting with glass. There are pros and cons to glass. On the good side, it's classic, it's sturdy, it's very easy to label. People are familiar with it, it's attractive, and glass can be very easy to sanitize because you can roll an entire rack of glass bottles into an oven and heat those bottles up to 180 degrees Fahrenheit, and there you go, your glass is sanitized. On the con side, glass can be expensive, not only to purchase, but also because it is bulky and because it is heavy, it can be more expensive to have shipped. Because it's bulky and heavy, finding a place for it to live in the warehouse can also be a little bit more difficult. And a lot of places, unfortunately, right now are not recycling their glass anymore. They will accept glass in a single stream recycling container because they want your plastic and metal. And a lot of that glass, from what I hear, is simply being thrown back right into the trash. So glass is really great for hot sauces, for condiments. It works well for spices and other specialty products as well. The caps are really easy to put on, usually with glass or lug cap. It takes a tamper seal very easily as well. Now, plastic has some benefits, certainly not an environmental benefit, as we're well aware, but it is lightweight. It is cheaper to ship. It's still, depending on the product that you buy, can be as attractive as a glass packaging. One of the advantages to plastic is that it can be directly printed onto the bottle. You may want to avoid the application of a label to your plastic product, and you can have people screen print directly onto those plastic packages. Now, then in terms of attractiveness, that can be quite attractive for a consumer. On the bad side, though, they can be more difficult to sanitize. Not all plastics are heat tolerant, so sanitizing them by heat doesn't always work, and in that case, you're going to have to use some sort of chemical sanitization, be that a chlorine-based product or a quaternary ammonium-based product. Say ammonia and chlorine in terms of food production, that puts a lot of people off, understandably. Consumer concerns, sometimes you will encounter single-use problems. There was a BPA issue recently, and it continues to be a problem with things leaching out of plastics into the final food product that people are concerned about. And while it can be attractive, it can also sometimes look fairly generic. And not all plastics are recyclable, so pay attention to what types of plastics you're sourcing if recyclable is something that's important to you. Flexible packaging, again, lightweight, cheaper to ship, easier to store, can be printed. A lot of the same things that we're talking about with plastics. However, flexible packaging are even easier to store because they can lay flat. 1,000 glass bottles, 1,000 plastic bottles, that's going to take up a fair amount of space. 1,000 flat, flexible packages, maybe a couple of boxes. So that is a great advantage when you're dealing with space issues. And again, much like the plastics, it can be printed directly on. You can see on that monkey, that's a nut mix product that we have made here at Blue Ridge Food Ventures, a very attractive package that is printed directly on it. On the con side, consumer unfamiliarity. People are not always willing to buy a package that does not fit what they think it should be. And if you're looking at this screen here, look on the left, those bags of white on the left side there, that's milk. People in the United States are not familiar with, and I'll have to admit myself too, not really comfortable with buying bagged milk. Is bagged milk a bad thing? By no means is it a bad thing, but we're just unfamiliar with it. So are we going to buy that bagged milk over a bottle of milk, a carton of milk? Probably not. The packaging doesn't always sit on shelves. It's harder to sanitize. And again, you get those same consumer concerns that you would have with the plastics in terms of chemicals leaking out in a hot fill or the nature of the product being single use. So when we get to the types of processing that you're going to encounter, there's county health department inspected processing. If you're a restaurant or food truck, you're doing meal deliveries, you're a caterer, you're going to be under county health. If you're making jams, jellies, candies, beverages, snack mixes, you're going to be under the FDA. Meats and other things, eggs, we'll get into that a little bit. I'm not going to focus too much on USDA, but mostly on FDA because that's what we do. But there's USDA inspected processing as well. There are some specialty productions with FDA. One we've talked a little bit about was your hot filled acidified foods. That's for making a acidified hot fill food shelf stable so it can live on the dry goods shelf and not in some other obscure refrigerated part of the grocery store that people aren't familiar with looking for your product. You're going to have to go through thermal process control school. You'll have to submit your recipes for scheduled process. That is a document that is issued by a food processing authority that dictates the times, temperatures, and pH measurements that you must document in process. While making that, you'll have to fill out a bear of a form called the FDA 2541E. That's something we can help you with, but it is very complex, very detail oriented. If you're unfamiliar with it, it can be really, really painful to try and figure out how to fill that thing out. And there's also some pretty important record keeping requirements with that as well. There's fermented food productions. These are increasingly popular. Kombucha, tempeh, kimchi, sauerkraut. Those avoid some of the control school concerns. The nature of the fermentation provides some food safety for you. Very popular these days. Cold filled acidified, that's particularly relevant for those of you who are doing, maybe I think somebody said they were doing mustards. You don't always want to heat the ingredients in your mustards to make the final food product change color, change flavor, change odor, and that's not something that we want. It's possible to do a shelf-stable, cold-filled acidified, but we have to suss out the unique concerns for that. I'm not going to go too much more into that. Aseptic and high-pressure processing, these are not things you're going to usually find in a shared-use, small-scale commercial environment, but those are other methods of creating a food-safe retail or wholesale product. Aseptic is something that's even more common in Europe versus high pressure processing or retort processing here in the US. Think about the difference between the tomato pastes that you can see in the grocery aisle. A can of tomato paste was done under retort or high pressure. That tube of tomato paste was done in an aseptic packaging line. Very expensive and very uncommon in the United States. So what is your processing regulatory environment going to do? Based on the needs and responsibilities, you're going to be under one of those three control environments. The county health, again, they are going to take care of things like storage and facility, production environment, equipment, hygiene, storage times and temperatures, and expiration dates. Your FDA, and in North Carolina, we're actually not inspected by the FDA directly. We're inspected by the North Carolina Department of Agriculture's Food and Drug Inspection Division. Those are the folks that are normally going to show up for the vast majority of the productions that we're concerned with here today. And for instance, I've been here at Blue Ridge Food Ventures for 5 years. I see the NCDA all the time. I've seen the actual FDA 3 times in 5 years. Now, 2 of those times were in the past 3 months. So they're out there, they do come, but more often than not, it's NCDA who's going to be on the ground with you. They do a lot of the same things that county health does in terms of record keeping, your storage. They look at other things, though, in terms of container handling, pH and water activity measurements, how things are stored as a final product, and whether or not you are properly reserving samples for future testing, something that's also relevant in terms of recall plans. CBD and supplements. If there are those of you out there who want to use CBD, be careful. You can't put it in a food or a beverage. We know people are doing it. And people aren't getting in trouble, but I know for a fact they're going on a list. What that means, don't know. The cat's out of the bag with that stuff, but just be careful. Make sure you do your due diligence in that. And then supplements, if you're going to label something as having some sort of effect to the body, then we get into some additional concerns. Go real deeply into that, but we're going to just mention it briefly there for you. In terms of food safety, the FDA has instituted the Food Safety Modernization Act. You may have heard of this. Again, something we can go really, really deeply into, and I'm going to try and go kind of quickly through this stuff. It's the first major comprehensive science-based food legislation in the U.S. since 1938. And why did they do it? Because of the cost in recall, lost sales, and consumer confidence that tainted food has cost the industry. It does a lot of things. It gives them regulatory control over growing, harvesting, and production. Something they wanted for a long time was mandatory recall powers for food that is tainted in the marketplace. There's a bioterrorism registration that people will go through with making a food product, and this is addressing intentional adulteration in defense of the food system, and other mandatory preventive controls like we've discussed, HACCP and PCQI, or CMGP, that's spelled wrong, that's going to be CGMP for current good manufacturing practices. What does it do? It's mandatory production safety standards for hazards, hygiene, packaging, temperatures, radiological hazards, mandates for inspection, requires access to your records, such as your food safety plan or your scheduled process documentation requirements. And important word there, unfettered. You have to provide access to these documents to your inspectors. They don't have to let you know they're coming when they come at your buildings, your equipment, and they are allowed to come and swab your raw materials, your finished product, also your production environments. Sometimes they'll swab tables, floors, kettles, and so forth. USDA, well, back up, you can learn a lot more about this. Go to the FDA and look at the Food Safety Modernization Act. This is just a surface treatment of what that stuff covers. FSIS under USDA, raw fruits and vegetables, egg products, meat, poultry, and farmed catfish. It's not always clear what regulatory environment you're under. Check out these examples here. A cheese pizza versus a pepperoni topped pizza. A frozen pepperoni pizza, because it contains meat, will go through 3 separate USDA inspections. Once when the meat is at the slaughterhouse, once when the meat is turned into pepperoni, and then at the pizza factory. Meanwhile, frozen cheese pizza is going to be under approval from the FDA once when you add that nutritional label to that product. Again, it can be confusing. The USDA is responsible for inspecting sausages, but the FDA inspects sausage casings. An open-faced meat sandwich where the ratio of meat to bread and other ingredients is more than half are regulated by the USDA. Closed sandwiches, which have 2 slices of bread, are regulated by the FDA. Right? It's crazy. It's confusing. Be good friends with your inspectors. They want to help you out, and they will help you navigate these confusing mazes when it comes to food production. And we can help you do that too. The FDA Food Labeling Guide, again, this is something that you can go online, download, research. I encourage you to do so. One of the things that you're going to want to have on your product, excuse me, it's coffee here, is your nutritional panel. You can have this drawn up by a food processing authority for a fee. Some of the things that you're going to see on these new labels, and that's one of the reasons that it's really great to use a food production authority for this, is that you can see from these two examples, they look different. So if you have one that looks like one on the left, the labeling requirements are changing, they're going to want to see that your new products have the facts on the right. You know, the servings have changed. You can see the serving size and servings per container have been flipped there. The font size is bigger. Calories and fat are emphasized. Sugars are emphasized. And your little nutrition percent daily value thing there at the bottom looks a little bit differently as well. Again, I'm going to go kind of quickly through this because you can go and download that FDA labeling guide and take these requirements as they are and submit your recipe to a food processing authority and have this drawn up for you. Some of your additional labeling requirements to think about, that nutritional panel is going to be on your label, but on your label also you'll need to have the common name and descending order of prominence of your ingredients. You're going to have to identify your allergens. You can put it in parentheses after the name of the ingredient or in a separate contains list, but be aware that any specific nut or fish species must be declared. It's not enough to just say fish. It's not enough to just say nuts. You have to say almonds or peanuts or anchovy and so forth. Weights and measures, one thing I see frequently overlooked is that you need both imperial measurements and metric measurements. So that's going to be ounces and grams for weight or quantity, and then fluid ounces for any liquids. Statement of identity, what is the food product prominently on the front label? The name and address of the manufacturer with qualifying information such as manufactured for or distributed by, particularly if you're using a co-packer. Font size, again, it's not something we can determine. There's a ratio, there's a formula in the food labeling guide that can show you what your font size has to be. And if you are marketing supplements, you have to be very, very careful about the words that you use. You cannot use any language that infringes on drug labeling wording. You can't use names of diseases or ailments or any language that implies that it cures or treats anything. So be very careful with that. Recall plans, any sort of physical, chemical, or biological adulterations in your product. You need the CYA there. Proper sourcing, particularly with things like shellfish. Keep documentation on where and when you got these things, how they arrived in your facility, where they've been stored, what condition they were in, and did you observe any problems with them. If you do, it's probably in your best interest to reject those incoming codes. Documentation of the storage, production, and shipping conditions, particularly in-process temperatures and storage temperatures. We have here at Blue Ridge Food Ventures data logs that live in the walk-in coolers and freezers that tell us what those temperatures are and alert us if there's ever a problem. So those are important aspects of your recall plan. What do you do if you need to recall a product? Well, first thing, notify the proper regulatory authority that there is a problem. Identify the batches that need to be recalled. If you're labeling and conducting your processing paperwork correctly, you should be able to identify very easily which batches have been contaminated. Right? Well, once you do that, how many did you sell and where did you sell them? And then find out those sales outlets, contact those sales outlets. Not only the sales outlets, but also your local, regional, and or national media outlets to let people know that this stuff needs to be returned. You need to collect all that product. You need to document that that product has been returned. A lot of times people just want to take pictures of the pile of product that's been returned. That's a good thing to do. And then again, dispose of that product and document the disposal method. Pictures, video, signing off on this is going to be very important. Once that's all done, notify the proper regulatory authority that it's been completed, and then conduct a thorough review of your production processes to prevent this from happening again. So Key pieces of equipment that we want to think about here: gas or electric. How are we setting this up, particularly if you're building your own kitchen? Do you have gas running to your house? If not, or to your facility? If not, you're gonna have to rely on electric equipment. Where do you get this stuff? We have restaurant supply stores. There are two great ones here in Asheville area. One is Blue Ridge Restaurant Supply, another is called FRS. You can go online to Amazon or eBay or other direct sales from production companies, and then other facilities that are going out of business. We got a lot of the stuff that we got here when Ingalls started revisiting their floor plans and building these new footprint stores. They pulled out a lot of their old equipment, and you can go to those supply warehouses and get things like that, or other businesses that are just closing in your area. But caveat emptor, buyer beware. If you buy used equipment, you run the risks of inheriting the problems that equipment has. So really common stuff, particularly for those of you who are under county inspections. You've got your double-decker convection ovens, your 6-top, 8-top ranges. I'm not going to go over all of the prices here, but you can see the difference between the new and the used prices for these sorts of things. Again, these are more relevant for restaurants or food trucks, things like that. Although some food production activities for retail and wholesale under FDA are used in these pieces of equipment. More common are things like steam jacketed kettles, 5-gallon, 40-gallon, 100-gallon. These are electric models that are self-contained boilers. They can be very expensive, but you can cook, again, up to 100 gallons. I've seen 200-gallon and bigger steam jacketed kettles for cooking food products. They usually have valves at the bottom, so you can empty them very easily, or flywheels that tilt them over to empty. They're great, efficient pieces of equipment. Similarly, on the left there, a tilt skillet. This is great for doing large-scale braising. You can use those for water bath canning methods, sauce production as well. Chopping and mixing equipment like RoboCube mixers, giant stick mixers for blending a chunky product into a smooth product. Particularly relevant to the types of things that we do are the fillers. On the left, the Simplex, that's an AS1 on the left there, and then on the right, that is an Apex pneumatically driven piston filler. Both of these things take liquids of varying viscosities, either from the hopper or from a direct feed hose into a cooking vessel or storage vessel, and volumetrically fill liquid products into jars, bottles, or even flexible packaging. They can be a little bit expensive, but they can vastly increase your productivity. You can think filling 8-ounce containers to the tune of, once you get really efficient, you can do about 700, probably 750 an hour on a piece of equipment like this. One thing that this doesn't show is another product called an Edhard filler. It's EDHARD for chunky stuff. If you are doing peanut butters or other nut butters or chutneys, that sort of filler is a gear-driven filler. That's going to be something you want to look into. They also do interesting things like filling jelly donuts. So there's your Edhard filler. I'm sorry, I don't have a picture of that on here for you. Labeling on the left, that's what's called the Easy Labeler. The letter E, the letter Z, labeler. That's a one-time purchase, a few $100. It's a hand crank labeler. The advantage to this is it's portable. You can do it pretty much anywhere. You can sit at home, put on open a bottle of wine, put on some music, and just sit there and label. You don't have to do these activities in a food production environment. So that could be a good cost saver for people. However, on the right-hand side, the CBC 300, that's an automated labeling line. That's something we have here at Blue Ridge Food Ventures. That can label, again, it can keep pace with your production fillers. You can be doing up to 700, 750 an hour on a piece of equipment like that you see on the right. The cost is reflected in that efficiency. Other methods of sealing products, on the left, you've got what's called a vertical band sealer. The blue layer there is the conveyor belt. And for those flexible packaging, the gusseted bottom flexible packaging, you can run that through that machine. It will heat seal above your zipper and You can even put a lot code embossed onto your package with that machine. If you're doing things that are in tubes, like your toothpaste tubes or lip balms or things like of that nature, on the right you have what's called the jaws. That is a tube sealer, and you can slide a chalk of 10, 15, 20 different pieces in there, and it will pneumatically and heat seal the ends of those tubes. On the left, a vacuum seal packaging. For things that need to have the oxygen removed from the packaging. You can also include a nitrogen flush, usually in those pieces of equipment, and that nitrogen is going to replace the oxygen in your packaging and reduce oxidization and improve the shelf life of your product. On the right there, the tamper tunnel, something that again can replace the usage of a heat gun to apply a tamper seal, tamper evidence seal to the neck of your package. That is the basics of what we wanted to cover today. I thank you for your attention. And now, I guess Tiffany, Laura, if we have anybody that have specific questions that I can address, I would be happy to do so.
We got one here. If you could repeat the website that was mentioned that you referred to the product and liability insurance.
Absolutely. That is what's called FLIP, F-L-I-P, or the Food Liability Insurance Program. The website there is going to be FLIprogram.com. Again, FLIP, F-L-I program.com. And they're very easy to work with.
All right. Tiffany, did you see anything else in there?
Across state lines, never mind, let's see.
Well, what I can say about that is, you're going to be under the requirements of the state that you produce in, but those requirements are going to be FDA requirements. So things that are going to be sold across state lines absolutely are going to fall under the purview of FDA inspection.
Okay. I don't see any other questions. If I missed a question that you guys have asked, if you have any questions really quick, put them in the chat before we let Michael go.
Well, the other thing, both Tiffany, Laura, if anybody has questions, I'm sure that you share with them my contact information. Give people my phone number and email address. I can give that here if you'd like. So the phone number to Blue Ridge Food Ventures is 828-348-0130. Again, that's 828-348-0130. So you call my office. If I don't answer the phone, I do my best to get back to you within 24 hours. You're also welcome to email me at michael@blueridgefoodventures.org, M-I-C-H-A-E-L at BLUERIDGEFOOD, V as in Victor, ENTURES.org. Don't forget that .org. You send it to .com, it's not going to come to.
Okay. We have one question here. How to self-process lard?
Self-processed lard. That is something that is slightly outside of my wheelhouse, because that is going to be considered a meat product that's under USDA. So processing lard into a retail or a wholesale product, you're going to need to find a facility that will allow for USDA inspected processing. That's not something that we can do here at Blue Ridge Food Ventures. What we can do with a product like that at Blue Ridge is help you get your process down. We can help you with experimentation, with sample production, things like that. But for the designation as a retailer or a wholesale product, you're going to need a USDA inspected facility for something like that.
So Michael, this is Laura. I have a question about that. So even though, so could that producer use your facility with a meat product, or are you advising them on what to do on their own?
Well, because we are not inspected by the USDA, a product that contains meat for retail or wholesale is not something that we can do. Now, we do have equipment and space for people who want to figure out how best to make that product. We can help people understand the equipment that
Great.
they can use to do that. The process, we can help them scale up recipes. We can help them troubleshoot their expansion and things like that. So I think we have the ability to really help people understand how best to make that product, and maybe even to offer some efficiencies for the future. But when it comes to putting that product on a store shelf, that's going to have to take place in a USDA inspected facility.
Great. And do you have a recommendation for that contact person in the region for just the USDA meat processing contact?
I do not.
Okay.
Because I'm sure that's something
Okay.
I can find pretty quickly. But yeah, because I don't work with the USDA, that's not something that I have offhand.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. And then the last question I had for you, this is Laura. When you're working with our clients that we refer to you, is part of that work helping them develop the HACCP and PCQI plan?
It can. However, HACCP and PCQI are both trainings that you would require, that would be attended from some sort of third party. I have my HACCP and PCQI certifications, so when it comes time for somebody who has also gone through HACCP or PCQI training to write those plans, having been through it before, I can definitely help guide people through that process. I can't give you the training that would make you HACCP or PCQI certified. That would be maybe a third-party class, either in person or online, that you would attend and get that certification. And then when you come time to get into the kitchen and draw up your paperwork and do all those things in practice that you've learned in theory, then I can come in and help you do that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All righty. Well, thank you, Michael. Tiffany, is it okay if I go through these slides real quickly? I know we're over time, but it's just a few slides.
Yeah, if you guys will just kind of hang tight and let her go over this. If you've, especially for those of you that haven't joined us in the past, this is great information for you.
Okay, hey y'all. So I'm Laura Lawfer. I work for North Carolina Cooperative Extension. I'm based in Jackson County. I work at the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indian Extension office when I'm in an office. And we have funding from the Appalachian Regional Commission, NC State, and the Cherokee Preservation Foundation for the Empowering Mountain Food Systems Project. And so we are located in this blue tip only in North Carolina, with the goal to improve the regional food system through education, entrepreneurship, and infrastructure, with the ultimate goal of increasing farm and food business income. So part of our plan was a collaboration with the Center for Ag and Food Entrepreneurship, which also encompasses Blue Ridge Food Ventures. And we have a very close relationship with Michael and Smithson to work with producers in our region, in those 7 counties and the EBCI, to help you in the process. So we have up to $3,000 in support for business. So all of this information you got today that is so informative and helpful, Michael is there to walk you through it. He is our intake person. And the way you do that is by entering our portal through your small business center. So I will show you that apply now button. In addition to our work with Cafe, these are some of the other things that we're focusing on right now of how we can support you. We do have grants. We received permission from ARC to work very closely with producers right now on focusing on refrigeration and food storage, farmers markets displays. So if you're interested in that, reach out to me. And we are working with Blue Ridge Restaurant Supply to help people locate new and used refrigeration. So we have some resources dedicated to that right now. That seems to be a big COVID need. And we have a direct relationship with Natural Capital Investment Fund. This is for folks who have larger funding needs, and we have some funds set aside to work with them. So you can reach out to me or Tiffany or Catherine or Katie at the SBCs about that. We have scholarships for training. So as Michael mentioned, the HACCP training or the PCQI, if you identify that training, we can fund that for you. And one of the newest things we are funding is the NC Farms app program in Cherokee, Clay, and Graham counties. If you have an agritourism operation, we can support your participation in this really cool farm app. We also have business support services. So if you're beyond your basic business plan, you can access our resources to help expand. So for instance, if you want to become an LLC, you need accounting assistance, graphic design, web design, social media coaching. The Small Business Center, again, you enter through your Small Business Center and they will refer you to the advanced business consulting folks. And there's the apply here button. It's live in my feed. So let me see if it comes up live for y'all. So this is what the form looks like. And I will receive this. I'm working on these this month in May, and can refer you to the support that you need in our project of those things that I just listed. So again, I know we're going over, but for anybody who's living in this 7-county region, this financial support to Blue Ridge Food Ventures is there. We're working with some folks making some apple chutney and some other folks making some kernel corn. But we would love to help you with that support for you to continue working with Michael or Smithson on your product. So does anybody have any questions about that, about the Empowering Mountain Food Systems project? All righty.
All right, if you don't have any other questions, let's see, hold on, one just popped up, I think. Is there
is the feasibility plan required for all applications? Tiffany, I'll let you answer that. I mean, how do you feel about working with our clients and having a business feasibility plan?
I mean, I think it's a great idea, because otherwise how are we gonna, the feasibility of a project, it's really sort of the roots of a business plan. So I do think that while it doesn't mean we're doing a full comprehensive financial projections, it's a feasibility, it's a budget. So I do think it should be required.
Right, and it helps us with our funders,
Right.
Because if we make an investment in your business, we have to show the federal government that investment, how it will incur additional income for you.
Thanks, Laura. You said what I was going to mention there. If you're looking for funders or grants, that they're going to require that you have all those ducks in a row before you try and look for financial support as well. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right, and we use the template from the Ag Options program. It's very straightforward, and it's just a good idea for any business to have an idea. How much money do I need? How much can I possibly make? You don't want to empty out your 401k and not know that you know, what your prospects are. So
one local resource that I will mention around my neck of the woods here in Asheville is the Mountain Biz Works, and there's a entry-level business course that I think is $400, maybe $600. It's over a course of about 6 or 8 weeks, but it is an invaluable investment to understanding how the costs of doing business go into your profitability. So I would highly recommend a course like that for anybody starting from scratch.
Right, and that's, you know, it depends on where you're located, but if you're in the state of North Carolina, I would say starting with your small business centers would be a really great first step. And then outside of that, I know we do have some people that are outside of the state of North Carolina. Reach out to your SBDC, that's the Small Business Development Center, and it's sbdc.org, and you can find the closest place to you. But if you're in the far west, which is where we are, reach out to your small business centers where you registered for this seminar, and let us sort of help you come up with the best plan to help you move forward. So, all right, well, we have run over, so we're going to kind of go ahead and end this. But again, you guys know how to reach out to us. I'll send an evaluation to you afterwards. And we want to thank you guys for joining us. Just make sure if you can join us, we are on schedule for next week as well. So we will have our next one regarding marketing your product and your brand next week at 10 o'clock. So thanks again for joining us, and I hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks for having me.
thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, Michael. And Michael, can you please share your slides with Tiffany?